these waters. Vermont's lakes are the most valuable and fragile economic of our natural resources. We need to maintain the conditions that sustain the full support of aquatic biota, wildlife, and aquatic habitat. It supports Vermont's tourism economy. And in order to fulfill the state's role as a trustee of its water and promote public health, safety, and the general welfare, it is the public interest of the General Assembly to establish these standards. The people, by virtue of the General Assembly, have spoken for us, and let's hope the technocrats at the Agency of Natural Resources hear their words and our words. I know in our hearts of hearts, most of us would prefer an outright ban. I think as politically pragmatic, we can regress to the 1,000-foot, 20-foot deep compromise. And let's keep the pressure up on Oliver Pearson, on the Commissioner Beeling, on Secretary Julie Moore, and on the fifth floor. Thank you very much, and let's keep it up, water warriors.
Whoa. Next up, can you hear it? Can you hear me? Maybe that's better. So, my name's Kim Mackey. I've been using Averill Lake up in Northeast Kingdom for about 30 years. Our camp, now about 65 people strong, has been using the lake for over 50. So what makes my commentary important is that I actually own a wake boat, and I don't bring it or use it on Averill Lake, and I don't recommend them on these lakes, and here's why. So wake surf boats don't belong. They're disruptive to everything else and to everyone else. They don't share. And so up on Averill Lake and many of our lakes, you know, it's a community of people, of lake users, for shoreline activities. There are plenty of things that keep swimmers and stand-up paddleboarders and some kayakers off the lake, mostly waves from higher winds and storms. I don't bring my wake boat up there because it's just not nice. It's not fun for others, it's not safe, and it's not practical. Importantly, we can, up on Averill, and do swim and paddle and sail and water ski and tube together. You know, water skiing and tubing don't chase everyone off the lake, and they have almost no shoreline impact. Waves, noise, nothing. In contrast, wake boats must not come close to almost anyone on a lake if you're going to be polite and appropriate. And by close, I mean about a half a mile, like 2,500 feet. It's like a storm or a too windy afternoon, and no one else can be out there. Just last week, I was paddleboarding with my daughter on our 8,000-acre lake back in Wisconsin. Multiple water ski boats were out there, maybe 200 feet away from us. Waves dissipate right before they get to us. It's nothing. Multiple ski boats out there. But as comparison, a single wake boat was out there with us, and it was at least a half mile, if not a mile away. And the waves reached us and almost knocked us down. Same lake, same conditions, same time. Wake boat literally a mile away, and here's the white cap coming, still comes to rock our world. So that's out in the middle of the lake. It's on the shoreline. Lakes like Averill and small, medium, open water lakes are the most vulnerable. I use my wake boat on an 8,000-acre, 4 to 5 mile across lake, and it's still disruptive. And remember, the technology is evolving. These waves are getting even bigger, and some of the research that the DEC has relied upon is years old, and the boats that we have now, it's totally different. So we're all here trying to help the state of Vermont keep our lakes safe and usable for most people. So, thanks.
Good evening. My name's Jack Widness. I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to see so many familiar faces. It's been a long trip to get here. What I'm going to talk about is our environmental tradition and what our group has represented as far as that's concerned. Our effort of responsible Wake Citizens Group manage wake sports to continue a long-standing Vermont tradition of the public rising up to protect environment against forces of land and water degradation. Vermont's tradition can be traced back to the Billboard Act, 1968, the 250 land use and development legislation in 1970, the bottle bill recycling in 1977, banning of jet skis, that was in the mid-1990s, the Aquatic Invasive Species Transport Statute in 2009, and most recently, the protection of the shoreland in 2014. We've accomplished a lot. In each of these cases, the voice of citizens, citizens like you, citizens like me, have drowned out the commercial clamor that would have our state turned into a paved, polluted, private playground for the privileged few. Thank you for being part of this important movement. Our first task today at the 5 o'clock meeting is to applaud the Department of Environmental Conservation for responding to the petition by initiating the rulemaking process and for giving us so many opportunities to voice our thoughts, with tonight being the fourth of 5 public hearings. So when our friend Oliver Pearson arrives tonight for the hearing, let's give him a big round of applause, and he's right here right now. Our second important task tonight is to resist the private political interests that have greatly weakened our original proposal's effectiveness. We must defend our original strong rule that will keep wake sports at an appropriate distance of at least 1,000 feet from shore. Doing so will protect 54 of our most vulnerable lakes and environmental recreation wakeboat from environmental wakeboat and recreational damage. And this includes 15 lakes that will be protected at the 1,000 feet. So, together, we shall succeed by providing eyewitness accounts of how wake sports have spoiled our normal and traditional water pursuits tonight. Together, we shall succeed by documenting the benefits of clean, clear, calm, and unspoiled lakes to the Vermont economy, as Jim just mentioned. And together, we shall succeed by showing that thousands of Vermonters, just like you, support our 1,000-foot rule. And finally, together, we shall succeed by showing how scientific data supports the stronger 1,000-foot rule. Together we can, and together we will.
Hi, everybody. Please pay close attention because this involves audience participation. All right? I'm Tom Ward.
I'm Catherine Babbitt.
And we live in Thetford Center. Lake Fairley is our local lake. The public support for a strong rule has been phenomenal.
As you all know, the movement to manage wakeboats in Vermont started in 2021 with a small group of individuals and a few lakes. By the time a petition was filed in March 2022, over a dozen lakes had signed on to a petition that proposed, among other things, that wakeboats operate no closer than 1,000 feet from shore.
As awareness of the negative aspects of wakeboats grew, so did the call for strong regulation to protect our lakes and traditional lake sports. Conservation groups such as Vermont Audubon, Vermont Center for Eco Studies, Vermont Natural Resources Council, town select boards including Thetford, Elmore, Glover, and just yesterday, Orwell and others, town conservation commissions, summer camps, town beach groups, and over 1,000 citizens have asked their voices to be heard. And what do they want?
1,000 feet!
To be more specific, 30, oh, you go ahead.
To be more specific, 34 environmental and local government organizations support a strong rule of 1,000 feet. Over 1,200 citizens signed a letter of support for Responsible Wakes petition. And what do they want?
1,000 feet! At last summer's Richmond and Manchester DEC public hearings, 78% of people commenting favored a strong rule. A majority of written comments also supported regulation. What did they want?
1,000 feet! In February of this year, the DEC's draft rule included a inadequate 500-foot distance from shore. Subsequently, a third public hearing was held in Greensboro. 91% of the speakers supported regulation, and 72% wanted the stronger 1,000-foot from shore distance, or even a total wakeboat ban. They did not want the 1,000-foot distance. What did they want? 1,000 feet!
And in the press, from all around the state, 47 articles and opinion pieces were written supporting strong regulation. Only a single commentary has been written in opposition. And what do they want?
1,000 feet! And lake associations, the people who know their lakes best. Of the 16 lake associations taking a position on the proposed rule, 14 support a stronger rule or ban. No lake association has opposed a regulation. And just a few days ago, the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds, aka FOVLAP, threw their support behind the 1,000-foot distance. Thank you, FOVLAP. What do lake associations and FOVLAP want? 1,000 feet!
DEC, Vermonters who care about Vermont's lakes are speaking, and our numbers and voices continue to grow in favor of a stronger rule.
DEC, are you listening? Please protect our lakes and ponds and traditional water sport users by honoring the expressed desires of Vermonters from all around the state. What do we all want?
Thank you.
Hi. Hard act to follow there. That just about wraps it up. We've heard from a lot of other people, and I just wanted one last thing before we start the hearing at 5 o'clock. I think we're supposed to wrap things up in only a few minutes. I'd like to answer a question that keeps coming up when I talk to people about wakeboats. Why should we care about this one small issue when there are so many huge, overwhelming issues in the world? True. Smoke from giant wildfires, massive flooding, housing shortages, childhood poverty. Yikes, where do we even begin? Granted, wake sports are a tiny niche interest, but isn't that the point? Why do tiny niche interests have such a big impact on so many of us? What do we do when the rights of individuals clash with the rights of the larger community? Vermont has a long history of support for private rights, even at the expense of the public good. It's like a reflex, and it shapes how the state thinks about wakeboats. What is the minimal restriction that impacts individual choice as little as possible? Unfortunately, what is missing is the recognition that people with their private rights end up restricting the rights of everyone else. The right to clean air, clean water, peace and quiet, personal safety, etc. According to the state, a very few individual people who enjoy wake sports, a tiny minority, are welcome to disrupt and potentially destroy Vermont's public waters that belong to all of us. The desire to create ocean waves for people to surf on, far away from the ocean, means everyone else needs to just step aside. Boaters, swimmers, paddlers, sailors, plants, animals, shorelines, and the quality of the very water itself. Just step aside. Of course, we are grateful to DEC for acknowledging the issue and putting forward a rule. Of course, we are grateful to this administration for supporting regulation. However, the 500-foot rule is a compromise designed to minimally restrict wakeboats. The state's rule caters to the desires of individuals rather than the public good. Right now, with the distance from shore set at 500 feet, the rule does not protect our most vulnerable lakes, the very same lakes bringing forward the petition. That is the message we need to bring into the public hearing. Yes, we support regulation, but 500 feet is not good enough. We need a rule that genuinely protects our lakes and ponds, and that rule should require 1,000 feet from shore. For those of you speaking at the hearing, please bring your own stories and your own perspectives, but please emphasize the urgency of getting a rule that is strong and getting it now. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. You have busy lives and crowded schedules. Thank you for showing up. Even if you are not going to speak at the hearing, your presence here matters. Thank you. And please remember, you can still submit written comments. All written comments are due by 4:30 p.m. on August 10th. Send comments by email to anr.wsmdlakes@vermont.gov with Wakeboats in the subject line. And again, you can click on that QR code. You can look up Responsible Wakes for Vermont Lakes. And thank you. The hearing starts in 15 minutes. That's it.
Thank you, Meg. The state hearing will start in 15 minutes.
So good evening. My name's Oliver Pearson. I'm joined by my colleague, Laura DeLugalecki. We both work with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation Lakes and Ponds program. Thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. We were here about a year ago in July of 22, talking about wakeboats at the beginning of this process. Now we're making a little progress and approaching what we hope will be the end of the rulemaking process. This is a public hearing. We're in formal rulemaking, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we have about 50 people who have signed up to speak and make comments. So thanks again for your interest in this subject. So I'll just jump right in. This is what we have to talk about tonight. A little housekeeping notes. I'll give a background presentation and present the draft rule, as well as the definitions that are relevant to the rule. Hopefully folks have had a chance to see those on our website. We'll have a few minutes for just comprehension clarification questions about the presentation, and then we'll go into the public comments. 50 people, 2 minutes, should be about 100 minutes. We'll talk about that in a minute. Just want to introduce another colleague, Caitlin Ellerman, who's one of our attorneys, has been very helpful in crafting this rule, has joined us as well. So housekeeping notes, purpose of this meeting, I'll provide some background, present the draft rule concept, then we'll obtain your feedback on the draft rule. It's not a meeting for discussion. We won't be responding to comments tonight, but your comments will all be responded to. The meeting's being recorded. Every single comment will enter the formal record. It'll be part of our responsiveness summary, and we will respond to all of them. In writing, though, we won't convene again to respond verbally. Again, the meeting's being recorded. We should finish around 7:30 p.m., comments starting around 5:30. Your comments need to be 2 minutes or less. We will ask you to finish at 2 minutes. There really is not a grace period, so when Laura or I stand up to ask you to finish, please be respectful, wrap up quickly, immediately, and then let the next person speak. This is obviously a subject that has lots of public interest and emotion and feeling, which is great. We love the public input. Just please be respectful and civil in your comments. We'll call people to speak by last name, sorry, not in alphabetical order, but in the order that you signed up when we went live a couple weeks ago. And everyone is welcome to send a written comment via email by 4:30 p.m. on August 10th. But if you've commented verbally tonight, it's in the record, it's being recorded. You don't need to send us your written comments. You can if you want, but it's not a requirement. The address to send those comments to is on our website. So that's the housekeeping. Did I forget anything? Great. So just going to jump right into process and procedure and background. There's a few seats up here in the front if anybody wants to sit down who's in the back row. I'm seeing 5 seats right here, a couple over there. You're welcome to stand, but you don't have to. So this all began in, well, I think the work on the petition began beforehand, but DEC's involvement began in March 2022 when a petition was submitted under the Use of Public Waters rule requesting DEC to regulate wake boats on Vermont's public waters. By April, we had marked those petitions administratively complete. And last July, we held 2 hearings, one in this room, one in Manchester at the library, and also had written public comment on the petition itself. And we have about 300 comments, which I'll talk about in a minute. From August to September, we held 10 meetings with affected recreational user groups as required under the Use of Public Waters rule. I'll talk about that. In October, we summarized the public comments. In November, December, we worked internally to develop the draft rule. We vetted that with Agency of Natural Resource officials. And in January, we released our draft rule concept at that point to the public. Not the actual rule language, but really what we were trying to achieve with this regulation. We held a public meeting in Greensboro, Vermont in February. It was well attended. For those of you that were at that meeting, some of my presentation tonight is repetitive, my apologies. March, April, based on those comments, based on our draft rule concept, we developed our rulemaking submission to the Vermont Secretary of State. In May and June, we prepared for, and then in June we held the what's called ICAR, or Interagency Committee on Administrative Rulemaking meeting. This proposed rule was approved unanimously by ICAR, and here we are now with a formal public hearings and written comment period on the draft rule. After this, we will incorporate all the comments that we received tonight on Thursday night and all the written comments received by August 10th, and we'll decide if we're going to make any changes to the draft rule based on the public comment. We'll then make a formal submission to the Agency of Natural Resources Secretary regarding what we think the final rule should be. That'll be then passed on to LCAR, the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rulemaking. We hope to have a meeting with them in September or October. And that would be more or less the last step. There's a few procedural steps that occur, but if the rule is approved by LCAR, it would then have an effective date and it would take effect via a formal amendment to the Use of Public Waters rule. We're targeting, if there is a rule, we're targeting spring 2024, so we have fall, winter to prepare for this rule, which I'll talk about in a second as well. So wake boats, this is what we're here to talk about. This is a wake boat. I think folks who are here are not new to this subject, but I always like to have a photograph so people are aware of what it is that we're talking about. So just getting into a few pieces of information on wake boats. Wake boats have unique features and impacts: enhanced wake, deep propeller wash that angles down at certain points when the boat is running, and large ballast tanks which are inaccessible in the sense that they can't be fully drained easily at an access area when leaving the water. Use of Public Waters rule, the rules are derived from statute, so we do have statutory authority to regulate public waters using these rules. We try to manage the waters as required by statute, which means that they're held in public trust for the benefit of all Vermonters and our visitors, and public recreational uses are protected. So these rules are intended to govern aquatic resource management and establish general management rules to protect normal uses on all of Vermont's inland public waters. Motorized vessels are a normal use, and in this amendment to the Use of Public Waters rule, you will see that we did not distinguish between one type and another type of motorized vessel use. Wake boats are a form of motorized vessel use, and therefore, through this amendment, they would be considered a normal use as regulated on Vermont's inland public waters. Public waters can be used for a variety of recreational activities under our rules, including wilderness, wildlife, winter recreation, fishing, and boating of various kinds. The rules do restrict the type of motorized watercraft that may be operated on certain water bodies, and they do set speed limits for motorized watercraft. And an example of this, a while back, the Use of Public Water rules was amended to limit use of jet skis or personal watercraft on lakes above 300 acres, and there's of course exceptions to that. Both some lakes are smaller but still allow jet skis. Personal watercraft, some lakes are larger and have personal watercrafts prohibited via specific petitions. And pursuant to the rules, the agency is required to manage public waters in a manner that avoids conflict, protects our natural resource values, and we use the water quality standards as one of our guides for that, and gives an appropriate recreational mix. So we'll hear a lot about this tonight, but the petitioners were concerned, this is why I think that they submitted their petition, of a number of the impacts of wake boats on public waters. One was shoreline erosion from enhanced wakes. These photographs are not from Vermont, but I was able to find some photographs where there was accelerated shoreline erosion attributed to wake boats in areas where there are a lot of wake boats used. The photo with the guy's foot is from Washington State. The photo with the bank is from North Carolina. Petitioners were concerned about the downward directed propeller wash disturbing lake bottoms, according to them, at depths of 20 feet or more. The petitioners felt that these downward directed propeller blasts, or wash, stirred up bottom sediments, created turbidity, could release nutrients that fuel algal blooms, and can affect plant environment, and even help spread or contribute to the spread of aquatic invasive species. And the petitioners were concerned that wake boats have been shown to spread invasive species like zebra mussels when moved between water bodies, and I understand that that's largely due to the inability to fully drain the ballast tanks, and there's some scientific studies that back that up. And petitioners were concerned about safety and impact on docks and shoreline infrastructure from use of wake boats on Vermont's lakes and ponds. The petition asked DEC to regulate wakeboarding and wake surfing, to limit it to defined areas, what they called wake sports zones, where the following conditions are met. Distance from shore is greater than 1,000 feet, depth is greater than 20 feet, and once you have an area that meets those conditions, it has to be at least 60 acres. And this petition, if enacted as is, would have allowed wake boats on 15 inland lakes. And just for reference, personal watercraft are allowed on about 30 inland lakes. What's the counterpoint? This is what we heard from our numerous comments over this very lengthy public review period. Wake sports are not a major problem in Vermont, represent less than 5% of all motorized vessels, and I actually think it's well less than 5%. Vermont should start with education and outreach around responsible wake sports use prior to regulating. The science around wake sports impacts is new, inconclusive, there's lots of different results out there. The proposed rule in the petition is overly restricted and not supported by what little science there is. Little evidence showing need for a 1,000-foot offset. Industry studies say that 200 feet is fine. Wake sports are fun, safe, and accessible to people who can't water ski for health reasons. Evidence of safety issues is lacking. Proposed rule is difficult to enforce. And people felt that telling them they couldn't use something they had purchased on a public water where they live is unacceptable, and the term taking was used in some of the comments we received. So this is also familiar ground, but our review of this petition really began, as I said, in my earlier slide. We held 2 public meetings in July, 80-plus comments over those 2 meetings, but 60% in favor of some form of regulation, 300-plus written comments, with 54% also in favor of some form of regulation. And I've been asked to say that that tally does not include the letter with almost 1,200 signatures submitted in the petition by Responsible Wakes for Vermont Lakes. We did hold these 10 or so meetings with the list here of affected recreational user groups to get their input, and those meetings were very helpful in crafting the draft rule that DC came up with. And as I said, in February, we presented this draft rule in Greensboro. We received exactly 60 verbal comments. The vast majority were in favor of a greater offset than 500 feet. Excuse me, that's a typo. They were recommending that the DEC use the 1,000-foot distance in the petition. And we received another 35 or so written comments around that meeting in Greensboro, that had similar perspective to the verbal comments we received in Greensboro. So what did our review consist of? We did a review of scientific literature. Myself, Laura DeLugalecki, and Dr. Peter Isles, who's not here tonight. We looked at what does the scientific literature tell us about the minimum distance from shore to minimize shoreline erosion. What's the minimum the depth to avoid benthic sediment disturbance and phosphorus resuspension, given that we're all very concerned about phosphorus in Vermont. How do we minimize the risk of spreading aquatic invasive species from ballast tanks? And we had some conversations with loon experts about what we know, what does the science and what does research and monitoring tell us today about the impacts of wake boats on loons and what other concerns for the future. We also reviewed precedent from other states and also operating considerations for the minimum number of contiguous acres that would be required to use wake boats safely in Vermont public waters, and we reviewed regulation in other states. And I'll whip through some of the findings from our review, but I'm going to be quick because we're not here to listen to me tonight. We're here to listen to all of you. And none of this information is new. I think there's a lot of discussion about this St. Anthony Falls study from Minnesota in 2022, but it's fair to say that this was the most influential study in us forming our distance from shore setting of a 500 feet distance. The study had basically, I'll skip to this slide, looked at the impacts of wakeboat waves out in open waters and compared them to conventional motorboat waves at 200 feet from shore. And that was actually really handy because Vermont statute says once a conventional motorboat is 200 feet from shore, it can operate at high speeds. So this was a very relevant comparison for the situation we have here in Vermont based on statute. And so with 4 different parameters, wave power, wave energy, wave height, we found that there was a distance between 425 feet to 600 feet or more required for a wakeboat wave at that distance from shore to have the same power, energy, and height compared to a conventional motorboat wave at 200 feet from shore. So that was a very useful study for us, and we looked at some other studies, such as some coming out of Quebec, which compared wakeboat waves to natural waves, found those less relevant to the situation in Vermont. I'm sure we'll hear about this in the comments tonight. And we essentially landed that the data indicated that wakeboats require distances between 425 and 600 feet from shore to be equivalent to non-wakeboats or conventional motorboat waves, and using some of the language in the use of public water rules, which requires us to regulate and resolve resource conflicts in the least restrictive manner possible, that also adequately addresses the conflict, we landed on the distance of 500 feet, which is in our draft rule. In terms of the literature and depth, this was my colleague Laura's work, but we found some studies that showed that at depths of up to 20 feet, the wash from wakeboats did resuspend phosphorus into the water column, and what was really, I think, telling was that one study showed that there's a 25% increase in phosphorus available for plant growth that's dissolved or soluble reactive phosphorus after wakeboats had passed compared to conventional motorboats. So we agreed with the petitioners that we should regulate these wakeboats and limit them to waters where there's depths of 20 feet or more. In terms of aquatic invasive species, there was a number of pretty influential studies that showed that ballast tanks with zebra mussels contained enough water after they were drained to allow those zebra mussels to survive for up to 5 days. Zebra mussels is an invasive species that's here in Vermont. We're concerned about it. We don't want it to spread beyond the 4 or 5 lakes that it's already in. So we agreed that well, actually, this is something that we came up with on our own with support from some of the comments we received, that we need to figure out how to regulate wakeboats in a way that limits the spread of aquatic invasive species. And that led us to this home lake rule, which I'll talk about in a minute. This slide has a lot of really small text. I'm sorry about that. But essentially, we were looking at what do we know about precedent and operating considerations. And for this one, we worked with some wakeboat owners, learned about how wakeboats are used, more often than not in a linear fashion, in a long, slow run, moving at speeds of 10 to 12 miles per hour. And so what we figured out was using the actual geomorphology of Vermont lakes, you would need at least 50 acres to allow for a wakeboat run to occur at a distance of 3,000 feet, which is, in the middle of a typical run length, and also have 200 feet within the wake sports zone to keep 200 feet away from a motorized vessel, which is required by statute in Vermont. So that's how we landed at the 50-acre zone. We had to come up with some reason to change it from the 30 acres. There was a use of public water rule. We felt that the 60 acres suggested in the petition was arbitrary, and we have basically a spatial designated way to support the 50-acre conclusion that we came up with. So this shows Forest Lake on the, left, and Lake Hortonia on the right. So Forest Lake only has 33 acres. That's 500 feet from shore and 20 feet deep. So you would not be able to do a 3,000-foot run, which is the red line in Forest Lake. The shape of that zone would allow you to have 200 feet from other boaters and swimmers, but too small. That doesn't meet that 50-acre minimum we felt was required. Whereas Lake Hortonia has, I think, a 55 or so acre zone up in the northeast corner of the lake, which has room for a 500-foot run. That's the, 2,000-foot run. That's the red line, and orange line is 200 feet. So other boaters could be 200 feet away from that at all times in requirements with Vermont statute. So that's how we arrived at our 50-acre zone, which is a slight decrease from what the petitioners had proposed at 60 acres. What other states are doing, this is not new. This shows when we focused on states, I wasn't really interested in what counties or towns are doing because we're a state regulatory agency. So Michigan, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Oregon, and New Hampshire have all taken steps to regulate wake boats. Some of them are in early phases, some actually have passed restrictions, but what you can see is most of the restrictions that are passed are pretty similar to what we already have on the books in Vermont. 200 feet from shore offset, and really not much more restrictive than that. Some of them did have minimum sizes, which for lakes, which could have motorized vessels, but we also have that already under statute. The requirement that other states to have of lakes being greater than 50 acres for motorized vessel use already exists in Vermont. So we realized quickly that at the state level, we were considering a rule that would be by far the most restrictive rule in the United States. probably the world for that matter. I don't know of any other country that has wake boats that is trying to regulate them in this manner, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So, our draft rule, which is up on our website and has been up there for a few months, I will read this because this is sort of why we're here. We would add Section 3.8 to the Use of Public Waters Rule, stating that wake sports are prohibited on lakes, ponds, and reservoirs that do not have a defined wake sports zone as defined at Section 518 and listed in Appendix E. It's helpful to understand what we mean by Section 518, so I'm just going to jump to that. 518 says a wake sports zone is an area of a water body that has a minimum of 50 contiguous acres that are at least 500 feet from shore on all sides, at least 20 feet deep, and located on a lake, pond, or reservoir on which vessels powered by internal combustion motors are allowed at speeds exceeding 5 miles per hour. So that's sort of the heart of our draft rule. A wake boat shall only engage in wake sports within a wake sports zone. And this is the piece that was not in the petition but was added based on our own thinking and a lot of excellent public comment. A wake boat must have one home lake for a given calendar year and display on the wake boat's port side bow a current agency-issued decal identifying the wake boat's home lake for the calendar year. A wake boat's home lake is the only lake or pond in which the wake boat will be used for the calendar year, except when the decontamination requirement of the next section has been satisfied. And for this rule and the next two sort of subchapters, using other rulemaking authority, we were able to extend the home lake rule to all lakes in the state of Vermont, including Champlain, Memphremagog, the Connecticut River reservoirs, and Wallace Pond. Typically, the use of public water rules only applies to inland lakes, but we have rulemaking authority under the Aquatic Invasive Species Statute, which requires prevention of aquatic invasive species through different types of measures, including it's illegal to transport vessels that have water in them. So we were able to use that rulemaking authority to extend the home lake rule to all lakes in the state. Then these next 3 points are really getting into the details of the home lake rule. I don't believe there's a lot of comment on the home lake rule, but I'll just briefly say 3.8D, prior to entering a Vermont water body other than the home lake, and prior to re-entering the waters of the home lake, after the use of wakeboat in another water body, the wakeboat must be contaminated at an agency-approved decontamination service provider. And these last 2 points basically say all other AIS provisions apply, and I think something that a lot of people are interested in, 3.8F, the above prohibition on wake sports may be modified on a case-by-case basis in response to petitions filed pursuant to the Use of Public Waters statute. That's already in the Use of Public Waters rule, but we decided to call it out given the interest on that point. Definitions: wakeboat means a motorboat that has one or more ballast tanks, ballast bags, or other similar devices used to enhance or increase the size of the motorboat's wake. And wake sports is to operate a wakeboat with ballast tanks, bags, or similar devices engaged to enhance the boat's wake, or with someone riding the wake directly behind the boat, or to use a surfboard, wakeboard, hydrofoil, similar device to ride on or in the wake directly behind a wakeboat with or without a rope. And we had really excellent comments on this. We had excellent support from our attorney, and I look forward to your public comments on these definitions. I've already read 518. So, Appendix E, which was referred to earlier in the rule, lists the 31 water bodies where under this draft rule, wake sports would be eligible, and I think folks are familiar with this list. The smallest of the lakes that's eligible is Sunset Pond in Benson, largest being Bombazine, plus, of course, the Champlain, Memphremagog, and other reservoirs in the Connecticut River that are not regulated. I'm wrapping up, trying to be done by 5:30. Next step, incorporate feedback from public hearings or in comments, that's what we're here to tonight, develop the final draft rule for approval by our secretary, present that rule to the Legislative Committee on Rulemaking with a summary of any changes that we've made. If LCAR approves the rule, it would take effect at a designated date, likely the spring of next year. And this is, I think, really important. We would use the fall, winter, early spring next year to launch a public outreach campaign to inform the public about the rule and prepare for implementation. Identification of all these decontamination service providers. Where are they? What are their hours? How much do they charge? Development of a wakeboat zone maps for the Avenza mapping app. Everybody has a smartphone. You can download Avenza. The wake sports maps will be on that. You don't need cell service. You'll be able to see, if you're holding your phone on your boat, are you in the wake sports zone or not? And with that, you can fill up your ballast tanks when you're in the zone and do your thing and stay in that zone. That was a great suggestion from a warden within Fish and Wildlife. I really want to give credit where credit is due for that point. Put appropriate signage at the access areas and online, and then establish the home lake identification and sticker issuance process. So that's our plan for the winter, to prepare for this. So that's what I have to say. I'm sorry I spoke so quickly. I will take some clarifying questions, and then we'll get into the public comment. Thank you very much. Sir.
Yes, Oliver. First, I want to thank DEC for having this project. It hasn't been easy. My question relates to the February meeting we had in Greensboro. I spoke at that remotely. There were 60 speakers and over 90% of them were pushing for 1,000 feet. My question to you, you can answer yes or no. Are those comments public record that are going to be taken into account when you make the final rule?
That was part of pre-rulemaking, so no, they're not part of our formal rulemaking process, and we have no legal obligation to publish them or respond to them. However, those comments are influential for those of us working on this rule. We presented a summary of those comments to our leadership. Our leadership chose to maintain the rule that we had drafted at that point. And we'll have another bite at the apple to present the summary of comments from these two meetings in the written public comment period to in our leadership in the next month or two. So hopefully that answers your question. And these are clarifying questions. I'm going to stop after 10 minutes, but we go to Eric, and then this gentleman in the hat, and then I'll come over to this woman with the orange thing. So 1, 2, 3, and then I'll go ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, I'm hearing you well. So there's not going to be buoys in the wake zone anymore, correct? Just a hat.
There's currently no statewide initiative to demarcate wake sports zones with buoys, nor has there ever been. I think should a lake community request that, it's something we can consider. Buoys that impede navigation require a lake encroachment permit application. We can't issue that unless it's in the public good, so there'll be a separate process for that. But no plans for buoys right now. Sir?
In consideration to the horsepower limit on boats, big boats?
No.
When you referred to the Minnesota study and you said 4 boats, were those 4 boats at one time or 4 different types of wake boats?
2 wake boats and 2 conventional motor boats. So it's 4 different types, 4 different individual boats. 2 were conventional motor boats and 2 were wake boats. And
it was at the same time?
no, I mean, they were doing runs one by one. They weren't all passing together. And so what you can see is yellow and green is the conventional motor boat. They had blue, red is the wake boats. And what was interesting is, it's not in these charts, but if you look at the standard deviation of these values, you don't see a lot of difference as you get closer to the max.
Yeah.
So I certainly respect the conclusions of the study. For example, wave energy greater than 575 feet. But when Dr. Peter Isles looked at the standard deviation from their detailed data, there weren't really significant differences as you approach 600 feet. That's influenced our thinking. I'm going to go 1 and then 2.
Can you comment on how the homeless rule will work with out-of-state boaters?
Yep. Out-of-state boaters will be expected to understand what the public use of public water rules are for Vermont. However, when we do our training at the greeting for the greeters and with Fish and Wildlife, there will be some enforcement discretion. So, for example, if someone from New York shows up and they don't have a home lake sticker, they'll be explained what the rule is, and they will be asked to go get their boat decontaminated by a greeter. The greeter doesn't have enforcement authority, so if that person says, no, I'm not doing that, and puts their boats in, the greeter will inform a warden, and the warden will have enforcement discretion to decide if they want to respond to it or not. If that person continues to violate the rule, at that point, the wardens have indicated that they will respond. So there's a little bit of enforcement discretion, but there's also an expectation that people who want to use their boats in our public waters will learn the rules. And we'll do our best. Those lakes will have to rely on the wardens and the public to inform us. There's a question over here. Yes, ma'am.
So it's interesting that you brought up enforcement because that's really my question. Because you're talking about increasing the burden of enforcement. Has there been any discussion or planning on how to meet that burden? If we're talking about potentially more wake boats and more reports of violations, you just mentioned that the burden is on the greeters, the public, and the wardens to be reporting this. But you haven't addressed any kind of enforcement in the context of introducing a new rule. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is something that we've given a lot of thought to and discussed with State Police Marine Division and the wardens. And at this point, there are no provisions to increase resources for enforcement. We will use the existing resources that we have for all use of public water rules issues. We don't anticipate an increase. You mentioned increasing wake boats. We see no data suggesting that this rule will increase wake boats. But as these issues come up, The greeters, combined with the wardens and State Police Marine Division, as well as in some lakes, local law enforcement, will be the ones responding to this. And at the commissioner level of both public safety and Fish and Wildlife, they've agreed to take this task on. I'm going to do two more clarification questions. We're kind of straying from clarification a little bit. 1, 2.
Did you say wakeboats made up less than 5%?
That's what our data that we've done a lot of ground truthing on for Vermont suggests.
All boats, like motorized boats, or?
That's motorized vessels.
Okay.
Anything with an outboard or inboard motor.
Less than 5%?
Yes. Ma'am.
And is it, do all lakes have service? You know, if somebody's got this phone or outside, you know, in their boat, is there a guarantee they're going to have service?
Well, the Events app doesn't require service, so there's no...
So it's going to be an app?
It's an app that you'll have to download when you have service at your home and you'll use on the lake, but when you're using it, no service is required. It's the kind of thing you can use, it's meant to be used in the backcountry where there's no service. So it's a free app, and there'll be instructions about how people can use that. So, great. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks for the questions. It's 5:29, so we're just going to move this podium out of the way. Folks that are speaking can come up right here. We're going to move this table and the projector out of the way. This is going to turn off. And Laura will call you up one by one, and let's get right into it. So give us 1 minute to move stuff, and we'll start the public comment period.
Did you want to
Plug in, yeah. Thank you. So please speak into the microphone. This computer is here because we're recording the meeting, so we have a record of all the comments. And I think we're ready to go.
Okay, I'm Laura DeLucalecki, and I work in the Lakes and Ponds program, and I'll be calling people up to give their comments. And I am setting a timer for 2 minutes, and I'm going to politely cut you off, and I hope that you respect that time limit. I'm not targeting anybody, we just to keep it moving and keep everybody's input fair. I'm going to call somebody's name, and then I'll mention who's next, so you can kind of be preparing. We are calling out the names in the order in which they were received. I've got James Sawyer up first, followed by June Bascom.
Excuse me, how is this speaker supposed to stand to get that rigmarole working there?
You just stand next to the microphone and speak into it. Is that good? Okay.
Surprise. Oh, surprise, surprise. My name is Jim Sawyer. I've lived on Lake Ellegold for 14 years. The lake is very popular with kayakers, anglers, and swimmers. And like many lakes in Vermont, we have a nesting pair of loons. Loon population has continued to grow over the years in Vermont, and I do not want to see a decline in the loon population. I personally believe wakeboats do not belong at Vermont lakes and ponds. But if the DEC is going to allow wakeboats, then I do support the DEC's proposed rule but it must be strengthened to establish a 1,000-foot rule from shore. Wakeboats plow through the water with stern down and bow up. It thrusts the prop wash down with such a force that it disturbs the lake bottom and uproots plants at depths up to 20 feet or more. Now, the lake bottoms are host to nutrient-rich materials deposited over thousands of years. The disturbing of the lake bottom releases these nutrients, including phosphorus, into the water, adding food for accelerated plant growth and possible toxic algae blooms. Now, a more immediate impact from the powerful downward thrust of the prop wash occurs in the close to shore zone, which is the location of where the fish lay their eggs. Now, these shallow zones are also home to juvenile fish, dragonflies, crayfish, and snails. Now, the powerful sediment waves from a wakeboat will destroy the food supply of the loons. It'll also mean less fish for anglers. So, as I say, wakeboats are a threat to loons, fish, and wildlife habitat. Now, what would be the cost of the state of Vermont in a few years to restore the loon populations the fish populations and the wildlife habitat along the shoreline. Thank you.
June Bascom, followed by Phil Dodd. It's kind of floppy. That's the problem. Yeah, let's see if we could.
You have to, whose phone is that, by the way? Oh, it's a kid? Okay. Do we have any tape? Yeah.
No, I haven't started to type.
I think Dan just
Okay.
helped us out here.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Good evening. My name is June Bascom, and I live in Montpelier. 5 generations of my family have owned property on Caspian and Greensboro since the late 1800s, and we recognize maintaining the quality of the lake is essential. I appreciate A&R and Responsible Wakes Coalition wanting to limit the impact of wake boats. However, it's not enough. I implore A&R to restrict wake boats from all but the very largest lakes in Vermont. You have already received significant amount of testimony outlining the detrimental impacts of wake boats on the environment. The home lake rule is a creative solution, but it does not address inherent risks to safety. The inability of wake boat operators and passengers to see over the bow of a wake boat with weighted stern and getting up to running speeds is just plain dangerous. The effect of multiple wake boat operating at the same time on a mid-sized lake would compound the impact of the waves and risk to others. There is no way for a boat operator to discern an arbitrary distance offshore as the operational zone and no practical way to enforce the shoreline setback. The current non-wake rule within a 200 buffer of shore rafts, swimmers, and other boats is already discarded by some boaters. Wake boats without further mid-lake restrictions become hazardous. The bottom line is wake boats are not compatible with the maintaining of water quality, safety, and serenity of Vermont lakes. There'll be no one doing the damage caused by wake boats. Simply put, A&R's responsibility is to permit, monitor, control ASI, and restore lakes and shorelines. Wake boats are contrary to these goals. A&R has a responsibility to assure the quality of lakes is not destroyed. You cannot meet the wishes of all when there are serious competing interests. It is then your responsibility to meet the needs of overwhelming majority of lake users and the lakes themselves, so they remain clean, healthy, and safe bodies of water. I implore you to ban wake boats before they cause irreversible deterioration of Vermont's pristine lakes. Thank you.
All right, so we have Phil Dodd, followed by Jack Witness.
Phil Dodd is absent.
Oh, okay. So Jack, and then Michael Hoffman.
I can't hear anything through this.
I didn't know you were calling.
Phil Dodd.
Oh, you are speaking
Yes.
for Phil Dodd.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry, I missed that.
Okay, Phil Dodd of Montpelier is sick.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm reading these
Let's
comments.
wait 1 second, because I think we're going to try to troubleshoot this
Okay.
speaker.
I got it. It's sort of on. Now the answer's there. Plug in. Hey, Laura, can you do a test?
Hello? Hello?
The mic was shut off.
What's on? Hello?
No, let's see.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds better. Okay.
Very.
Can you hear me better? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was that bad. Okay, apologies.
All right, okay. I'm obviously not Phil Dodd. I'm speaking for him. Is that okay?
Closer.
Phil says, I am not a lakefront property owner, but I live in Vermont, and I kayak, swim, and sail my sunfish on Vermont lakes. I dislike wake boats and wish they had never been invented. I agree completely with those concerned about the impact of wake boats on lake shores, lake bottoms, and wildlife. But I want to focus on 3 other points. When appropriate, the state has in the past set hard limits on the use of its lakes. We don't allow people to overnight on their boats on Vermont regulated lakes. We have maximum speed limits. We don't allow wakes or high speeds within 200 feet of shore. We don't allow trees and bushes to be out on the water's edge. When something is clearly bad for our lakes and ponds or those who use them, we should forbid it, as we have before. In this case, I support banning wake boats, but also believe the 1,000-foot setback rule is better than the 500-foot option. The problem with the setback approach is that it limits other uses of the lake to the outside edges. Some say a wakeboat wave will dissipate somewhat over 500 feet before it hits the shoreline, but a person who is paddling 400 feet from shore could be only 100 feet from a wakeboat and would be walloped by these big waves. This draft rule suggests I should hug the shore when kayaking or sailing and not venture in the deeper parts of the lake farther from shore. That does not seem fair to traditional users of these lakes, including many tourists who are drawn to Vermont's tranquil lakes. I also worry about wakeboat impacts on someone like my 6-year-old granddaughter, who has her own kayak, but could not handle these waves. I worry about the impact on my wife and myself. We are in our 70s and paddle lightweight pack canoes.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay, thank you. All right, so next we have Jack.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening. My name is Jack Widness. I live on Lake Raponda in Wilmington. I've been a member and organizer of the Responsible Wakes for 2.5 years. While I enthusiastically applaud the DEC's decision to institute new water use rules for managing wake boats, the DEC's recommended minimum operating distance from shore of 500 feet is way too close to be effective. With every passing day, I'm increasingly convinced of the need for a minimum of 1,000 feet, ideally more, for the reasons that have been mentioned here tonight. Tonight, I have two critically important issues to discuss. Both impact the enforcement of the DEC rule. First, the DEC's definition of a wake boat, which Oliver showed, must be clear, precise, and broad enough to prevent manufacturers from skirting the new rule. Manufacturers must not have ways, that is, loopholes, to develop new novel watercraft technologies that create enhanced wakes. It is these enhanced wakes that cause the damage. The importance of having the right wording cannot be overemphasized. Second, Vermont lakes where wake sport activity will not be permitted, that is, all but the 15 largest lakes, if the 1,000-foot rule from shore is adopted, should not permit outside wake boats on their lakes. Lake residents who already own wake boats will be allowed to continue to use them in non-wake boat mode, but allowing the outside wake boats opens the doors to problems, both inadvertent and intentional. Banning outside wake boats also simplifies enforcement. Thank you.
All right, Michael Hoffman, followed by Jim Curley.
He lost the mic. Got it? Whose phone? Oh, okay. I thought it was mine. My name is Michael Hoffman. I'm in Montpelier, and I'm part of a family that has been on Caspian Lake for, well, over a century now. I'm also a retired professor of architecture, and one of my specialties was site design. And the key to understanding any site is to understand the character of the place. And Caspian is a bucolic and peaceful lake environment. It demands protection. Once it is degraded or compromised, it's almost impossible to recover what is lost. Others have spoken to the specific technical issues of the boats, and this is not to say that I'm anti-motorboat. There are many on Caspian, but in my experience, this idea of an honor system and self-enforcement is well, let's keep it civil. It's not a good idea. We have a 200-foot no-wake rule near shorelines. It's also near swimming lines, and Caspian has a number of rafts. And my experience of the boaters out there is most of them have absolutely no idea where they are on the lake. And these are people that live there, and they're towing their kids around, and they are focused on what's behind them, not what's ahead of them. So I think the whole idea of any kind of a boundary on smaller lakes, the inland lakes, is really it's a no-go. So I totally and completely support banning wake boats entirely from the inland waterways. Thank you.
So we have Jim Curley, followed by Jim Langle.
Hi, my name's Jim Curley. I'm from Middlesex, Vermont. It's clear the petitioners for this rule change are not in favor of the proposed rule crafted by DEC. To be clear, that's a point that we can all agree on, I think, here. There are more non-wake boat owners than wake boat owners in the state. The petitioners would have you believe that that matters. It does not. What it actually shows is that wake boat owners make up a very small percentage of the population of the boat owners here, especially in Vermont. The reality is Vermonters own wake boats. Those of us who do own them also care deeply about our lakes, our wildlife, and our shorelines. Surfing is not enjoyable close to shore. It is not enjoyable in shallow water. People who surf seek out deep water for a better experience. Again, exploiting a problem that is not real. We're not coming to your little lakes. Growing up, I was taught to be a good neighbor, to talk out problems, to be good to one another. The new norm is to hide behind computer screens and blast folks for doing something that they are 100% permitted to do. Vermonters are not interested in more restrictions, not interested in more rules. Vermonters talk to one another and sort out differences. This is not the Vermont way. The one thing that is convincingly clear is that both sides are not happy with this rule change. To me, it is obvious that this is just the beginning, and the unintended consequences of bad policy will be more restrictions. We're setting a precedent here to continue to tee ourselves up to be the most restrictive, if that's something to be proud of. It will be interesting when the home lake rule is applied to fishing boats, or when kayaks have to stay within 50 feet of shore, or when your seawalls that you've all spent thousands and thousands of dollars need to be removed because DEC already discourages it. This is the reality, folks. This is the Pandora's box that you're all so willing to open. Prepare for the ride.
Jim Langle, followed by Meg Handler.
Thank you, Jim. I've come out from behind my computer screen. I'm Jim Langle from Lake Elmore. I'm here to challenge the interpretation of DEC of the research on wake dissipation. It's wrong. The leading hydrologists, environmental scientists, aquatic researchers disagree with your conclusion that 500 feet is adequate to dissipate surfing waves to a safe level. Rather, the research findings and the experts point to a safe distance closer to 1,000 feet. The scientific literature includes 4 studies of wake dissipation from wake boats. Each of them ran a wake surf boat and measured the height and energy of the wake at various distances. All of them found pretty much the same thing, that the farther away you get from the boat, the smaller and less powerful the wake becomes. Their graphs and tables look almost identical from all 4 studies. On average, they find that the height of a surfer's wake at 500 feet is about 10 inches. Okay? This is a dangerous wake. It would swamp my kayak. It would knock over my granddaughter. It would flip an angler out of his John boat. A paddleboard wouldn't have a chance. This is why the knowledgeable experts recommend safe distances of over 600 feet, 983 feet, 300 meters. This is why Oregon banned wake surfing on the Willamette River. This is why many lake governments have done the same, banned them, or set offsets of 700 or 1,000 feet. DEC's proposal of a 500-foot offset would subject all of us, normal lake users, to dangerous wakes. The 500-foot rule flies in the face of the research findings, of the expert recommendations, and of your own duty, DEC, to protect the normal uses on all lakes and ponds.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, next up is Meg Handler, followed by Ben McLaughlin.
I support regulation of wake sports, but the proposed rule doesn't protect our smaller lakes. Most of the lakes that brought this petition won't be protected. Please increase the distance from shore to 1,000 feet. I'm worried about the gap between what we hope for, protection, and what we get. At 500 feet, the state creates a system that won't genuinely protect our most vulnerable lakes. The 500-foot rule invites wakeboats onto lakes that are simply too small to absorb their impact. Operators have to guess at where they are allowed to go. No signs indicate depth. No buoys mark boundaries. Most importantly, there's no enforcement and no consequences for violations. The state just hopes that wakeboat operators obey the rules, but the rules have no teeth, and hoping for compliance is never a successful strategy. Shadow Lake is a good example. 210 acres, 116 camps. Jet skis are prohibited because the lake is too small. Theoretically, every camp, 116, could own a wakeboat. We hope this never happens, but the system welcomes all wakeboats, and they can be as big as anybody wants. 210 acres is objectively very small. If protection is truly the goal, the 500-foot rule doesn't create an effective system to protect shorelines, water quality, wildlife, or people. By contrast, a 1,000-foot rule creates a simple, enforceable system. Wake sports would be eliminated on Shadow Lake, period. Very clear, no guessing, easy to enforce. I'll end with a quote from James Clear.
Sorry, your time is up. I know, that was awful timing.
Okay.
You can put it in a written comment. We've got Ben McLaughlin, followed by Daniel Sharp.
Do you start the timer when the speaker starts?
When the speaker starts speaking, yes, not the transition time.
Good evening, all. My name is Ben McLaughlin, and I've been boating on Lake Fairley for the last 25 years and look forward to many more. I do operate a wake boat there, and it's some really good family fun. I think that the 500-foot draft rule is a reasonable compromise and doesn't put undue pressure on what a 1,000-foot rule would do, and to still have wake sports only operating on a few lakes. I think it does protect the smaller lakes. I encourage the DEC to continue on their mission of driver education and licensure, because I think there's a lot of good that comes from that. I oppose additional restrictions. Selfishly, of course, it leaves us to continue to operate on Lake Fairley, but again, I think this is reasonable based on the science that was presented earlier. I think that the definitions, some of the wake sport definitions in the proposed draft, I think do need some clarifications with regard to or, meaning I think that the enhanced wake operation, whether, again, by whatever means, whether it be ballast or wedge for various methods, but not just wake sports, but enhanced wake operation, I think has some better definition. But again, I represent a few that we do still operate, and on Lake Fairley we've been operating in the area that was proposed in the draft rule, and I think that it's been working pretty well. So thank you very much.
We've got Daniel Sharp, followed by Tom Ward.
Hello, I'm from Lake Iroquois. The brave little state of Vermont makes a mark in environmental leadership that far exceeds its physical size and population. Some of the thorniest problems relate to water resources. Adopting rules to prevent environmental harm and to promote safety and public access is difficult. The DEC's proposed rule has been described as the most restrictive rule in the country. That doesn't take into account the complete ban on wake sports on a 40-mile stretch of the Willamette River in Portland, Oregon, a metro area of 2.5 million people, or the bans on wake surfing adopted starting in 2009 in 4 Wisconsin towns, or the 700-foot buffer for wake surfing in 4 additional towns in Sawyer County, Wisconsin, adopted in 2019. All of us working with responsible wakes are avid users of our public waters, including power boaters and water skiers. Recognizing that wake sports enthusiasts just want to have safe fun, our proposed rule allows wake sports wherever the sport can be reasonably practiced. There are suitable areas for wake sports in Vermont, including Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog. Wake sports are not accessible to most people. When wake boats produce ocean-like surf, the impact on a lake and everyone else on it is enormous. The Responsible Wakes proposed rule is wholly consistent with Vermont's attitude about natural resources and wide public enjoyment of outdoor activity. We call on the Agency of Natural Resources to carry on Vermont's leadership role in environmental matters and adopt the DEC's thoughtfully revised rule along with a 1,000-foot buffer. Thank you.
All right. We've got Tom Ward up, followed by Catherine Babbitt.
Hello, I'm Tom Ward, a resident of Thetford and a member of the Lake Fairley Association. We are glad the DEC agrees that wake sports are a concern for Vermont's lakes. However, the 500 feet, the DEC's draft rule will allow wake boats to operate too close to shore. For the safety of traditional lake users, equity of access to Vermont's lakes, and preservation of lake ecosystems and Vermont's vibrant recreation economy, this distance must be at least 1,000 feet. For decades, swimmers, paddlers, anglers, water skiers, and sailors have shared Vermont's lakes and ponds harmoniously. Wake sports disrupt this harmony, as a single boat can create unsafe conditions for many traditional users. These problems will only worsen as the number, size, and power of wake boats increase. Under the DEC's proposed rule, traditional users will be relegated to a narrow 500-foot strip around the shore, while even a single wake boat can dominate a lake's larger center. Swimmers and small craft users will be forced to the edges. Those less experienced and at greatest risk, children and seniors, may avoid lakes entirely to prevent being capsized or injured. Sports requiring the center of the lake, such as water skiing and sailing, will no longer be safely enjoyed when a wake boat is present. The proposed DEC rule has it backwards. The DEC's rules are supposed to be the least restrictive possible. However, their proposed 500-foot distance restricts the wrong group. The DEC rule forces the majority of lake users to a small band at the lake's edge while placing the least restriction on wake boats. This is backwards rulemaking. Traditional users should not be the ones restricted. Additionally, the science the DEC has used to support the 500-foot distance did not evaluate the increased impact of multiple wake boats operating concurrently, and wake boats sold today are already heavier and more powerful than those in the studies. DEC, please increase the operating distance from shore to at least 1,000 feet to provide safer lake access for the majority of lake users and better protect lake ecosystems, wildlife, and Vermont's vibrant recreation economy. Thank you.
Catherine Babbitt, followed by David Bradshaw.
Hi, I'm Catherine Babbitt. I live in Thetford, and I'm a board member of the Lake Fairley Association. An advertisement from Wakeboarding magazine says, "A big wake is a glorious thing, and a new wake boat is described as a wave-making monster. Wave-making monsters do not belong on Vermont's small, vulnerable lakes. With up to 600 horsepower engines, creating 3 to 5 foot ocean-like waves. These boats have no right to dominate lakes and threaten the safety of all who enjoy traditional water sports. Large wakes swamp other boats, shift and lift docks, and create safety issues for all. Many of our Vermont lakes are already rated stressed. Why, after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to help our lakes, would the DEC allow these powerful boats? With 2,000 to 4,000 pounds of added water weight, these wave-making monsters harm our small lakes' fragile ecosystems. Wave-making monsters add nothing to our state's thriving summer camp and tourist economy. Wakeboats must be kept at least 1,000 feet from shore and operate only on big lakes. Now, as I've said before, a wakeboat on a small Vermont lake is like someone smoking a cigar in a crowded room. It stinks. DEC, are you listening to the 1,000 plus, 1,200 plus Vermonters who last summer signed a letter of support for Responsible Wakes petition? Are you listening to local select boards and conservation groups, FOVLAP, summer camps, the 14 lake associations, and many environmental organizations who all support the Responsible Wake petition? We ask you, please put politics aside and do your job to protect our small lakes. Please change your proposed rules. Thank you very much.
Next up, we've got David Bradshaw, followed by Jennifer Andrews.
From the Water Sports Industry Association. I broke my glasses, but I'm putting them on. In our test, waves were shown to lose height and energy rapidly if they are large, such as those formed during wake surfing. Once the wake reaches shallow water, energy becomes dissipated due to bottom friction. As with all boats, factors such as speed and total displacement have large and explainable influences on size and propagation characteristics of its wake. Because wind waves are persistent, they represent a more significant source of shoreline impact than wake boats. From wake boat manufacturer literature, I like a nice boat that puts out a monster wave. When you look at one of these boats, I don't care who you are, you can't deny how badass these things are. Up to 6,088 pounds of hidden ballast, including 5,000 pounds subfloor, unlimited lighting options, custom floodlights, 9,600 watt speakers. The stereo, it's almost hard to explain. It has so much power but sounds so crystal clear. 18 speakers. Everything we do is to the next level. The wave is just bonkers. I was nearly run over by one of these things on Lake Willoughby last summer. The guy piloting the boat couldn't see me, and I couldn't see that there was someone in the boat. And I don't believe bringing the ocean to Vermont waters has any business or justification, whatever. But a 1,000-foot standoff is damn better than a puny little 500-foot symbolism. Thank you.
We have Jennifer Andrews, followed by Michael Ann Widnes.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Andrews. I live on Shadow Lake in the Northeast Kingdom town of Glover. Shadow Lake encompasses 217 acres, it changes, Meg, which has seen only traditional use: water skiing, tubing, paddling, sailing, fishing, and swimming. Many of the owners of the camps at Shadow have been there for generations. Some are brand new residents. I also represent Shadow Lake Association's membership as its president. First, I would like to applaud the DEC for presenting this proposed rule, recognizing the proven research that demonstrates wake boats cause harm to lake environments. Moreover, anecdotal data suggests that public safety is at risk as well. I will only focus on two of the many reasons to regulate wake boats that were cited in the Responsible Wakes for Vermont Lakes petition: public safety and shoreline impacts. It is with respect that the Shadow Lake Association, the Shadow Lake Board, the Glover Select Board, and FOVLAB urged the DEC to amend the rule to include not a 500-foot setback, but a 1,000-foot setback from shore. Visitors and residents alike know Shadow is small, quiet, and safe. Shadow Lake, which includes a public beach, is accessed by many, including young children and seniors. Waves from operating wake boats can be 4 to 5 inches tall and more. The rate of energy dispersal for a wave this big to relax back to water that is safe for swimmers, ski boats, paddlers, and anglers to operate in takes time and space. Allowing more shoreline setback will also better protect fragile shorelines, the same shorelines that have just been impacted by flooding. It must be amended to reflect the 1,000-foot shoreline setback. In closing, accepting the proposed rule with the 1,000-foot shoreline setback will ensure healthy lakes and guarantee safe access to Vermont lakes for everyone.
Next up, we have Michael Ann Widnes, followed by Robert Martin.
I'm Michael Ann Widnes, and I live on Lake Rapanda in southern Vermont. Willie Sutton, the notorious bank robber, was once asked why he robbed banks. He famously replied, "Because that's where the money is." A dull response for sure. When I'm asked why I support a 1,000-foot buffer from shore for wake boats, as opposed to the 500-foot distance recommended by the ANR, my answer falls into the duh category as well, because 1,000 feet will protect more lakes, 15 more lakes to be exact. And not just lakes. It will protect more paddlers, anglers, sailors, swimmers, all these conventional users of Vermont lakes from the disruptions caused by wake boats' enormous wakes. It will protect more beaches and shorelines from erosion, more docks and moorings from damage, and more property values and economic activity by not discouraging tourists and other visitors. 1,000 feet from shore will protect more loons and other wildlife vulnerable to the outsized wakes generated by these boats. It may even protect more of what remains of the sense of peace and tranquility so many lake users cherish about their lakes. The studies that have been done to date are not the final answer. More research is on the way. If the wake boat buffer is set at 1,000 feet, but we learn in a few years that it's overkill, the buffer can be reduced, no harm, no foul. However, if the buffer is set at 500 feet, and new studies indicate 1,000 feet is the minimum required to mitigate the harmful impacts to people and property, damage may be done that will be expensive to remedy if remediation is even possible. We are very grateful to the DEC for recognizing the problems wake boats create and for recommending steps to address those problems. However, a more comprehensive and sustainable solution to the problems require a buffer of 1,000 feet. Thank you.
Next up, we have Robert Martin, followed by David Kaminsky.
Yeah, my name's Robert Martin. I saw my first wake boat last year on July 17th. It was a very busy lake activity Sunday afternoon. It was over 1,000 feet away on the other side from where my stepson and I were visiting on our moored pontoon boat. As I watched the wake boat wave train move across, I waited to see what these unusual waves would do. I've been on this lake for 74 years. Never seen anything like it. First, I noticed how most of the lake activity changed, such as how the mother with a toddler on a stand-up paddle board almost made it to shore. When the waves reached our raft, it was lifted off its anchor and thrown hard into our pontoon boat. We both looked at each other, and he stated, "That's new." Now think what happens when young children playing along the shore. I do want to thank Oliver and DEC for getting at least 750 of our lakes to avoid this peril. But the wave science being claimed in support of the 500-foot rule does not explain how such wave damage that I saw can happen from 1,000 feet away. At 500 feet, it would be twice the force. Now, I was the math science specialist at VTC for some time. And the definition of science, at least what I told students, is repeatable experiments that produce similar results.
That's been 2 minutes. Thank you.
You sure that's right?
And just a note, anybody can submit written comments until August 10th. We have a 4:30 p.m. deadline on August 10th. So if you don't get everything that you wanted to say at this time, at this meeting, or you want to make another comment later, please submit something in writing. We view and review and respond to written and verbal comments at the same level. So next up we have we have David Kaminsky, followed by Stephen Toffel.
Thank you. My name is David Kaminsky. I live in Heinsberg, and I'm on Lake Iroquois. I support regulation of wake sports, but the current proposed rule needs to be strengthened by extending the distance to shore to 1,000 feet. I'd like to emphasize this concern based on equity and accessibility. Vermont's ANR is committed to, quote, ensuring that everyone living and visiting Vermont has meaningful access to all the activities that we find in Vermont. And this should include both lands and waters. One wakeboat can disturb those who wish to enjoy the lake through traditional affordable activities like we've been hearing about, like swimming, kayaking, and so forth. This is very similar to how one person smoking cigarettes can pollute the air for everyone else breathing in the same public space. The Vermont legislature addressed this problem in 1993 by banning smoking in all public buildings. This ban does not outlaw smoking altogether. It just limits smoking so that the majority of the public is protected. Smokers are still allowed to enjoy their cigarettes or their cigars. In the case of wake sport activities, it's only fair that they be limited in a similar manner so the majority of people enjoying Vermont's public lakes and ponds be protected. The way to do this is to limit wake sport activities to only those bodies of water that are large enough to accommodate them safely, while reducing risk to swimmers, paddlers, and others. Wakeboarders can still enjoy their sport on these larger lakes and ponds. By including a requirement of 1,000-foot distance to shore rather than 500 feet, the risk to those enjoying non-wake sport activities is reduced, the shoreline is further protected from ocean-size wave activity, a safety margin is created in anticipation of future growth of wake sport activities, and everyone can more safely enjoy Vermont's public waterways as per the ANR mandate. The current proposed rule needs to be strengthened by extending the distance to shore to 1,000 feet to ensure equity and accessibility for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, we have Stephen Toffel, followed by Mary Oliphant.
Good evening. My name is Steve Toffel. I'm a member of the Thetford Select Board. I'm speaking tonight for myself. And I'm speaking in favor of the 1,000-foot rule specifically. Lake Fairleigh, and with Lake Fairleigh in mind. Lake Fairleigh is a small lake surrounded by the towns of Fairleigh, West Fairleigh, and Thetford. And the 1,000-foot rule would admittedly, effectively, keep wakeboats off of Lake Fairleigh. There are 6 camps on the lake which are of significant economic importance to the surrounding towns. The safety threat posed by large waves to campers in canoes and kayaks cannot be ignored or overstated. Also, the cyanobacteria algae blooms, which are created or exacerbated by the churning up of the bottom of the lake, also would affect the lake's economic viability. We as a society recognize the government's right to regulate what types of vehicles can safely use our public roads. And we should have no problem with regulating how boats can safely be used on our public waters. I want to thank the DEC and the ANR, and specifically Laura and Oliver tonight. Thank you.
Next up, we've got Mary Oliphant, and followed by Adam Martin.
I'm Mary Oliphant, a Williston resident. I live near Lake Iroquois and visit its shores in all seasons. I support the regulation regarding the management of wake boats and their activities on Vermont lakes and ponds, but I do not feel the regulation is strong enough. Wake boats should maintain a distance of 1,000 feet, not 500 feet from the shoreline. I have had multiple experiences to support this statement. Here are a few examples. Watching my grown children paddleboard close to the shoreline be capsized by the waves of a wake boat. Listening to the loons and having them drowned out by the roar of a wake boat. Watching a family of ducks fish and having them scatter due to the waves from a wake boat. Knowing about the destruction of the lake's delicate shoreline from the force of a wake boat. There is a place for wake boats in Vermont and the recreation they provide, but you can promote safety, serenity, and the preservation of the lake by keeping wake boats 1,000 feet from the shoreline.
Next up, we have Adam Martin, followed by Jamie Longton.
I own a kayak, I own a canoe, I also have a paddleboard. I have a camp on Lake Groton and love the tranquility of that lake. Last weekend, I enjoyed watching a pair of loons teach their loon how to fish. I enjoy watching campers from Stillwater and the visitors to Boulder Beach as they enjoy our lake in canoes and kayaks. Groton has 6 wake boats on its 400 acres, and I own one of those. In the last 8 years, we've averaged around 30 hours per year on the water. Those 30 hours include tubing, skiing, and surfing. For those that want to listen, surfing is not an event that you do for hours on end. On average, a person will surf 5 to 10 minutes, depending on ability. That means the boat isn't creating a wave that entire time. People fall, the boat stops, and the learning starts over. My point again, if you care to listen, is that out of the 30 hours a year we use our boat, I would dare say less than 10% of that time is spent surfing. Contrary to the fears that have been expressed, boats are not flocking to Vermont to surf. Contrary to the misinformation, these boats are not traveling from lake to lake. Contrary to opinions, our loons are thriving on our lake and others. Invasives being spread by these boats? What a joke. You people are so far-reaching and thrive on the fears of others. Berlin Pond has milfoil. Never has had a motorboat on it. In fact, this department knows all too well that this pond had invasives before any boats were allowed on it, and they know why. Birds. Birds spread invasives. So what's next, a petition to limit loons from traveling from lake to lake? Give me a break. This group of people that say they want to protect Vermont lakes are pushing for so much more than just boat rules. This is just the beginning, and unfortunately our state and this department is listening and being pressured to act. Our state has this stupid rulemaking process where anyone can file for a rule and depending on the pressures in media and obviously an agenda, they will react accordingly. How about a rule to keep kayaks and canoes close to shore, say not more than 100 feet? I mean, isn't it a safe way to create space for them and allow motorboats to be on the broad part of the lakes? How ridiculous. How about that bird restriction? Let's consider that rule too. This Wake for Vermont Lake crew has done a great job organizing and putting pressure on the state, and the state has reacted. But that's not good enough. No compromise, no common ground. It's all or nothing for them. They obviously are not true Vermonters and prefer to hide behind rules and regulations versus communications with neighbors and finding common ground, like Vermont used to be. They find the time to make fun of folks with stupid cartoons that suggest everyone that owns a wakeboat is evil and wants to hurt loons and shoreline. How dare you suggest that just because I own a wakeboat, I don't want to protect my investment or shoreline?
2 minutes.
How dare you suggest I don't care about loons? How dare you suggest, how dare you paint that picture?
All right, next we have Jamie Longton, followed by Peter Erb.
Yeah, I think that's our first comment that falls into the disrespectful category. Please. That's not helpful. If anyone else is considering a comment like that, please reconsider it. Thank you.
Jamie Longton, Sunset Lake in Benson, Vermont. We're the smallest and clearest lake in the lake, the 31 lakes that are approved for wakeboarding or wake surfing. And two things. I guess I would invite Oliver and your scientists to come to Sunset Lake with a wake boat. And let's take a ride up through the middle where it's proposed that we're going to do this, what's approved as a wake zone. And let's measure what happens, because I had a speedboat, and twice around that lake with its steep shores, you get a reflective wave that's like an ocean wave with a regular powerboat. And I think if we're going to rely on Minnesota's, let's try it on a real lake here in Vermont. And I'd be more than willing to support a study. Let's see what 500 foot does. So I don't, is that anything that the DEC would even consider?
Can't hear you. I'm not really responding to comments.
Okay, okay.
We don't have a wake boat. That's the big problem.
I'll find you one. We'll find you one. We'll find you the biggest one.
We're not responding to comments right
Okay.
now. Please
All right.
continue.
Well, that's my comment. I'll put the rest of my comments in writing, but I'd like not to rely on Minnesota studies. We have real lakes here. Let's try a real Vermont study. And I'd be happy to work with the DEC on it.
Next up, we have Peter Erb, followed by Ted Blackburn.
I am not Peter Erb. I'm Marilee Lovell from Heinsberg, but I'm speaking for Peter Erb, who couldn't be here tonight. He was the former zoning administrator in Heinsberg, so these are his comments. It is becoming increasingly clear that wakeboats will destroy our Vermont lakes as we currently experience them. They are used by a minuscule portion of the people that enjoy our lakes and are more expensive than most can afford. They will cause the release of more phosphorus than will be mitigated by hugely expensive municipal sewage treatment upgrades, threaten the successful resurgence of the loon, erode lake shores and other regulations, mandate the owners of the lake properties to protect, fly completely in the face of the state's efforts to control carbon emissions, and are the perfect device to spread invasive species from lake to lake. The waters of Vermont should remain available to the vast majority of us, and even a 1,000-foot setback requires all other users to be confined to an untenable, much smaller area along the periphery of the lakes. There is only one answer that respects the citizens of Vermont and others that visit to enjoy our state, and that is to ban them entirely, or at most allow them in only our largest lakes. Keep Vermont as a leader in today's world.
Next up, we have Ted Blackburn, followed by Robert Martin.
Hi, I'm Ted Blackburn. I'm from Lake Raponda. And I want to start out by quoting a fellow who I don't know. His name is Bob Bartlett. He's from Lake Fairleigh, as a matter of fact. And he wrote in a letter referring to wake boats, he wrote, quote, "They should not have the right to force others off the water." Now, a 1,000-foot ban is better than a 500-foot ban. But if you're rowing 200 feet from a wake boat, you're just simply screwed. Simple as that. You know? These boats force most small lake users to be near shore or off the water. And is that fair? Now personally, and I hate to get personal, but I have to here, I have a floating dock anchored by 4 poles, which I put in seasonally. I have a small Boston whaler which is tied to the dock. Last year, a wake boat went by a few times and pulled the anchors out from my dock, which had my boat, which floated away, strangely enough. Not far, I got it, but nevertheless, worse than that, there was a beaver lodge near the shore, near my dock, about 50 feet away. It took a few passes of the wake boat, but the undulation of the water disturbed the lodge, and the lodge was broken up. The beavers, well, they disappeared. They had been there for 8 years, and they went away. They've been gone for about 1.5 years, and we have not seen them. Is this what we want for the future of our small lakes? Is destruction, not preservation, our goal? I hope not.
Next up, we have Robert Martin, followed by Paul Zaloom. Oh, I guess your name was on there twice. That's interesting. Okay. I don't know. All right. So Paul Zaloom, followed by Theodore Marcy.
Hi, my name is Paul Zaloom. First of all, I really appreciate all the hard work that the DEC does on behalf of this brave and very battered little state. I've owned a camp on Woodbury Lake for over 40 years. I'm a daily open water swimmer. I also frequent Shadow and Parker, 2 little ponds that will allow wake boats under the 500-foot regulation. I urge you to increase the limit to 1,000 feet. When I swim, I tow a swim buoy. I stay close to shore most of the time, and I pay close attention to the boat traffic. None of these measures will help any swimmer recover from a silent and unexpected 3 to 4 foot wave. In a wake boat's enhanced wave mode, when heavy ballast weighs down the stern and causes the bow to rise, the forward vision of the boat operator is blocked from seeing swimmers in their path. You saw that in the picture of the wake boat, and you testified to that, David. Obviously, we open swimmers, we're a minority, but we're at significant risk, to put it mildly. Will our very reasonable proposed regulation, 1,000 feet from shore, minimum 20-foot depth, minimum 60 contiguous acres, will this regulation come into effect only after someone drowns? Of course, we all hope not. Please, let's act now before someone perishes. Thanks for listening.
Next up, we have Theodore Marcy, followed by Kathy McGrath.
My name is Ted Marcy, and I'm a resident of Williston, Vermont. The lake I am concerned about is Lake Iroquois, that beautiful lake that is shared by Williston, Heinsberg, Richmond, and St. George. Several of my very good friends live on that lake. But my family also owns a summer camp on Lake Placid, New York, a 2,200-acre lake where wake sports are prevalent. And while not a Vermont lake, that experience informs my comments today. First, I support the proposed rule, but I believe it should be strengthened to confine wake boats to 1,000 feet from the shoreline instead of just 500 feet. This would eliminate wakeboarding from the smaller vulnerable lakes where that distance would not be possible. In the larger lakes, the distance would allow waves to dissipate further so as to minimize the impact on the shoreline and on others enjoying the lake, and that is the experience that I have at Lake Placid. At Lake Placid, our family stopped skiing directly from our boathouse about 10 to 15 years ago, Instead, we slowly motor out into the middle of the lake, well beyond 1,000 feet, turn off the motor, have the skier enter the water, and only then do we get up to speed. It's just as fun and much more considerate of our neighbors. And when we are at the dock, and others follow this practice, we can swim, kayak, and enjoy the dock in peace. So confining wake boats to 1,000 feet from shore in an appropriately sized lake is definitely feasible and much more considerate and safer. Thank you.
Next up, we have Kathy McGrath, followed by Will Melton.
I'm Kathy McGrath of Fairleigh, Vermont. I've lived year-round on Lake Morey, which is one of the larger lakes on which wake boats would still be allowed, even with a 1,000-foot restriction. I've lived year-round on Lake Morey for more than 25 years, and I've been a member of the Fairleigh Select Board for about a decade, and that's a role in which I rarely get the opportunity to be radical. I'm speaking today on behalf of Bonnie Oaks Homeowners Association, a group of 6 households on the northeast end of Lake Morey. Our association is radically and enthusiastically in favor of a wake boat ban. Lake Morey is a shallow lake. Its average depth is only 28 feet. Last summer, we had an exceptional problem with cyanobacteria. Today, Fairleigh and the DEC is collaborating on its eradication, which on Lake Morey, the cyanobacteria on Lake Morey is primarily due to legacy phosphorus on the bottom of our shallow lake. Working together, we will, or I will say Vermont will, invest more than $750,000 in an alum treatment to weight down the phosphorus and to keep our lake available to the public for swimming, boating, and fishing. Now, it's odd to note that at the same time, we are here with the same DEC to consider how to manage wake boats. Oliver, while I know this is not really the case, and in no way do I mean to be disrespectful, it could be perceived that DEC's right hand doesn't know what its left hand is doing. I don't understand why the state is willing to invest $750,000 to eradicate cyanobacteria and still enable wake boats to potentially churn up our lake bottom. Remember, we're shallow. Churn up our lake bottom, devastate our fight against cyanobacteria, and you know what I'm saying.
Next up, we have Will Melton, followed by Sarah Harrington.
The lake I love is Lake Raponda, which is so small and so shallow that any restrictions the agency sets will remove all wake surfing there. Good, but I'm here to argue that a 500-foot from shore ban is a losing proposition for all Vermonters except those few who can afford these destructive machines. I have a good friend, a lifelong Vermont power boater, who's the best water skier I've ever seen. But when wake surfing arrived, he was the first to speak out about the threat they are to lake shores and bottoms. And he's not the only one of my motorboating friends who feel that way. In all my years on the lake, nothing has united our neighbors like their opposition to wake surfing. Powered watercraft are so fast they quickly cover a huge span of a lake's surface. So who can blame them for coming close to shore so others can see their fun? Expecting them to stick to the widest, deepest part of a lake is a fool's game. So is asking our understaffed and overloaded law enforcement officers and greeters to make sure wake surfing happens more than 500 feet from shore. That's also true if wake surfing is limited to 1,000 feet from shore, I know, but here's the difference. A 1,000-foot from shore limit will add more than 15 lakes where wake surfing will not be permitted, including such legendary waters as Harvey's Lake, Joe's Pond, Lake Fairleigh, and Lake Iroquois. We have learned that the only effective enforcement is peer pressure from citizens and property owners who know the rules cold. Wake surfing is allowed on this lake or not. and an expanded ban will make a world of difference for those 15 lakes. It will be such a shame if you let them down. Thanks for listening, Laura, and all of you.
All right, next up we have Sarah Harrington, followed by Pam Lads.
I'm reading for Sarah Harrington. Thank you to A&R for putting forward a rule. I'm happy to see official recognition of the problems posed by wakeboats. 500 feet from shore isn't good enough. Please restore the 1,000-foot distance originally proposed in the petition. I'd like to address the flooding we've experienced this summer. Climate change has never seemed as real as it does now. 5 inches of rain in one afternoon makes a big impression. It also wreaks havoc on water quality. DEC sent out a message following the recent flooding. Quote, as water levels are very high, waves from motorized vessels will impact parts of the shoreline that are likely more susceptible to erosion, and therefore please operate your boats at very low speeds until water levels recede to regular levels. End quote. When the water is high, people measure 500 feet from shore, starting at a new point higher up on the shoreline. As a result, boats operate closer to what used to be the old shoreline, measured when the water was low, and within the old, low water 500-foot buffer. Also, water reaches and erodes soil that hasn't previously washed away. Any good rule must leave room for this variability. Water moves as conditions change. This is inevitable. A&R should design a rule with enough flexibility to accommodate change. The proposed 500-foot rule doesn't do that. There is no margin for error. 1,000 feet from shore provides the space needed under variable conditions. Please increase the distance back up to 1,000 feet.
All right, we've got Pam Lads up next, followed by Diane later. Pam Lads here? Okay, all right.
I guess I'm up.
Yes, so Diane later, followed by Carmen Anderson.
Thank you. My name is Diane Leader. My family and I own properties on Willoughby Lake, where we vacationed for 77 years. Somebody got it, I think, with over 100. Thank you for the opportunity to address this issue this evening. As we all know, accidents happen, and boating accidents happen. But reports of one recent accident in which an 11-year-old died caught my eye. A boat was, quote, rocked by a wake, unquote, and nearly all 12 passengers were thrown overboard. They were in a 23-foot boat that's larger than most power boats using our smaller lakes. Imagine what a wake like that would do to a swimmer, a paddleboarder, a kayaker, or someone in a canoe. Those boats may not be on our lakes yet, but they're coming. They're on the market now, and at least one manufacturer is reported to be working on a boat that will put out a 7-foot wake. Research now is looking at boats that are on the water now. Sadly, even with strict regulations, we don't have the ability to enforce them. I'm concerned that the proposed regulations attack the problem with a fairly narrow definition of the boats that generate these wakes. And I'm concerned that as regulations on wake boats increase, the boating industry will focus energy on other ways of generating equivalent aquatic thrills as a means of circumventing these restrictions. I ask that you broaden the definition to anticipate what comes next. We all know we'll be back here.
Thank you. Next up is Carmen Anderson, followed by Chris Owen. Carmen? All right. Is Chris Owen here? Okay, and after Chris is Sean Brown.
Good evening, Chris Owen, a 3-decade-plus camp owner in Holland Pond, resident of Worcester, Vermont, an ardent angler. Many here prefer an outright ban on wake boats. As a political pragmatist, I would endorse the 1,000-foot rule. Given the trend toward larger boats and the nature of the nascent studies of wake boat impacts, it's incumbent on the agency to take a more conservative path and anticipate the future, knowing that prevention of problems is less expensive than the cure. The soft marly bottoms of lakes and ponds is host to an elaborate chain that has evolved over millions of years. Dragonfly nymphs live there. They predate dinosaurs as a species. Marly bottoms are made of the vegetative and mineral deposition of ages. They are the nursery of all that live in our lakes and ponds. Marly bottoms are the storehouse of nutrients that determine water quality. Spawning fish fan away these sediments, revealing clean gravel. This substrate is vital for the reproduction of fish population in our lakes. Nature's mosaic of aquatic life is delicate. Wake boats are not. Their jet engine thrust stirs sediment, disturbing insect habitat, compromising their population. The silt smothers fish eggs. The food chains suffer, and I catch fewer fish. Stirring the bottom releases phosphorus and speeds up lake aging prematurely. We've heard many of the arguments. I won't belabor them. Prevention is cheaper than cure. Let's spend our tax dollars responsibly. And we implore Governor Scott, Secretary Moore, Commissioner Beeling, and Oliver to err on the side of conservation.
Next up, we have Sean Brown, followed by Elizabeth Doran.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Brown, and I am a homeowner on Lake Fairley and a board member of the Lake Fairley Association, where I lead the Water Quality Action Committee. I'm here to voice my support for the proposed rule and believe it will continue to make our lakes a resource for all to enjoy. While I strongly support the common sense provisions of the rule, I do believe a 1,000-foot distance from shore is more appropriate for our small inland lakes. I won't repeat what others have already stated with regard to the research studies that make this case. My focus today is on the safe, fair, and broadest use of a limited resource. Lake Fairley, like many small lakes in Vermont, supports a variety of recreational uses, including swimming, canoeing, kayaking, fishing, etc. We have several summer camps where kids of all ages get to safely engage in these activities. Many athletes use the confined waters of Lake Fairley to train for long-distance swim competitions. Sailors on small sunfish sailboats must follow the swirling and often unpredictable winds on our small lake and often traverse through the widest, deepest parts of the lake. Kayakers and paddleboarders cross the lake to find calm waters. All of these recreational activities coexist and use the same confined space on the lake without controversy or safety concerns. Wake boats change that. When a wake boat is active on the lake, swimmers have to avoid getting too far from shore. Kayakers and canoers are restricted to the perimeter of the lake to avoid getting swamped. Sailors on small boats must try and get to shore to avoid capsizing. In short, when a wake boat is on the lake, only a wake boat can be on the lake. These boats are not designed and have no controls to limit their negative impact on other users of the lake. They may work well for larger bodies of water, but they're just not appropriate for our small multi-use Vermont lakes. I want to again thank Laura and Oliver and the DEC for their leadership in drafting this rule. And thank you.
All right, up next we have Elizabeth Doran, followed by David Kidney. Elizabeth Doran? Okay, is David Kidney here? David Kidney? Okay. Melinda Petter? Okay, so Melinda Petter followed by Chip Stone.
Hi, I'm Melinda Petter from Williston, and I'm going to talk fast. The Vermont A&R is an administrative agency, and according to the Cornell Law School, generally administrative agencies are created to protect a public interest rather than to vindicate private rights. Here we have the private rights of wakeboat owners to enjoy their boats, and here also we have the public interest, or I should say public interests, because there are many: personal safety, shoreline erosion, aquatic habitat preservation, water quality, air quality, and nuisance. Let me state it again. Agencies are created to protect public interest rather than to vindicate private rights. Responsible Wakes has done extensive work in providing scientific support for this regulation to include a 1,000-foot restriction from shoreline. So I am troubled as to why the DEC, which should be protecting public interest, why they would draft a regulation that does not reflect the best current scientific recommendations. These boats will become more numerous as the industry expects to grow. More boats, more power, more destruction. Our new regulation needs to be robust. Let's not start with a just okay regulation. Instead, let's incorporate the best science today so that we don't have to revisit this regulation every time the wakeboat industry adds a new upgrade. The Vermont A&R webpage states that we must all be responsible stewards of our natural environment for this and future generations. This goal melds with the mandate to protect the public interest. So please strengthen the proposed regulation to include the 1,000-foot restriction from shoreline. I ask the A&R, the DEC, to do your job. Do a good job and do the right job. Protect our public interest. Thank you.
Next up, we have Chip Stone, followed by John Dodd.
I'm Chip Stone. I think it's all been said, so I will be very brief. While I would prefer a prohibition on wakeboats on all inland lakes, I too am a pragmatist and think that the 1,000-foot alternative is the best available at the moment. My perspective on wakeboats relates to the users of these lakes and traditional users. I'm speaking of paddlers, swimmers, anglers, sailors. Wakeboats and these traditional users are incompatible. You can't have the two happily together. It simply doesn't work. And I think that DEC is in a position of having to make a choice between traditional users and wakeboat users. It's a difficult choice, but I think it's one that you guys have to make. Again, I would say my preference would be an outright ban, a prohibition against all wakeboats on inland lakes, with the exception that there would be a provision for any inland lake to petition to the DEC to allow wakeboats, so that the tables would be turned. Instead of a prohibition against us traditional users, it would be allowing wakeboats on lakes where those residents chose to have them. With that, thank you.
Next up, we've got John Dodd, followed by John Dillon. John Dodd is not here. John Dillon? All right, and after John Dillon, we've got Eric Splatt.
I'm John Dillon. I live in Middlesex. I used to cover the legislature, and as Chip said, when they shut off debate, it was, I think everything's been said, but not everybody has said it. So thanks for giving me my turn. I'd like to thank the DEC for recognizing the threat that wakeboats pose to water quality and traditional uses like kayaking, sailing, and fishing. Remember, the water belongs to everyone, all Vermonters, held in public trust for all to use, but under this rule, our public waters would be hogged by the few at the expense of the many. Just look at the numbers. The DEC estimates about 100 wakeboats are in use in Vermont. By contrast, tens of thousands of people enjoy quiet water pursuits. Yet the kayaker seeking a peaceful paddle across a lake is likely to turn back in the face of a mini tsunami. A mom teaching her kids to sail will have to find a breeze close to shore. With a 500-foot limit, the rule effectively creates an exclusion zone by confining the vast majority of lake users to shoreline areas where the best angling, sailing, or paddling may not be found. The environmental impact is equally severe. The boat's downward thrusting propellers will churn sediment from the lake bottom, crashing waves will erode shorelines. The phosphorus that's released will fuel the toxic cyanobacteria that already fouls our lakes. Remember, that's a problem we're spending millions of years tens of millions of dollars a year trying to fix. Why make it worse? Some more numbers. The DEC says there's a $93 million annual benefit from even this limited regulation. These benefits, the state says, include preservation of water quality and, quote, the protection of the tourist economy that depends on clean and safe lakes, unquote. Clean and safe lakes, let's keep them that way. The 1,000-foot from shore limit proposed by Responsible Wakes is a good first step, but I think wakeboats should be banned on our inland lakes. They're just too small. Extreme, I don't think so. Vermont was the first state to ban billboards. Wake up, Vermont.
Next up, we have Eric Splat, followed by Rodney Putnam.
Hello, I'm Eric. I was just wanted to speak on behalf of, I guess, the water sports end of it, wake boats. I am a wake boater myself, but I also believe that there's many regulations now as it is, and I know that a lot of people aren't, but I'm a firm believer in education. And I feel like education and awareness should come first before we add more regulations, and also the fact of it being enforced. If we had more enforcement, we wouldn't have as many problems. Right now, there's barely any enforcement on our lakes. I'm on the largest lake, Lake Bomazine. If we see enforcement out maybe 10 times a year, maybe a little more, they do their best, they're stretched out, but when they're there, they make a big difference, and it helps for many years as people get educated. And I think that Vermont has always been about education and not about rulemaking. Thank you.
All right, next up we've got Rodney Putnam, followed by Kim Mackey.
Hi, my name's Rodney Putnam. I live on Lake Iroquois, and I own a surf boat. My family's been surfing. We moved to the lake in 2015. There were 3 boats in our category on the lake at that time. This year, there's 3 boats in our category at this time. I don't believe that this is an exploding category. The largest dealership in the state sold almost 200 boats last year, and only 1 or 2 actually had a surf setup. Loons have had successful nestings on our lake as long as we've been there. They're beautiful. My mom loves to come and watch them. We love them every morning. There's been a lot tonight about the phosphate level. The Vermont scorecard for our lake puts our phosphate level at the lowest it's been in years, and we've been doing our thing for, since 2015, and other people were doing it before then. I appreciate everyone's input. The last thing we want to do is have anybody hurt. We want to be safe. We're trying to teach our kids to be responsible boaters. We read the lake. If there are too many kayakers or paddleboarders out, we don't go out. We wait till the lake is quiet. We want to share the lake. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you guys.
All right, next up is Kim Mackey, followed by Corey Scritchfield.
Good evening. Thank you
for the process. Thank you for the participation. My name is Kim Mackey. I'm on Great River Lake. I represent 8 cabins, about 65 people. We've been going to the lake for about 50 years. And I own a wake boat myself. I do not bring it here. I live in Wisconsin. We summer here. I think that there's a couple things I can add as a wake boat owner that may be underrepresented. One I think is easy is that, you know, my wake boat is 450 horsepower. That's like a minimum. I got a small one, it's 20 feet. So a ski boat's 150 to 200 horsepower. So number one, it's a different animal, and I'm not sure that that's reflected in the legislation. The direct drive, the angle of that prop is a big difference. So these are different animals. You know, the impact of the wakes, I think, has been underrepresented. These wakes are huger, they propagate more, and they're much more disruptive than I've heard. And I've been there generating the wakes, and I've been there trying to deal with the wakes. And I tell you, a half-mile away, that wake comes across the lake, and it's still that tough to stand on that paddleboard, and I know what I'm doing. So I think that we're relying on stuff that's a little bit old. The boats are newer, they're more powerful, they're more disruptive than is being represented. Now, they are fun, and on my 8,000-acre lake in Wisconsin, they're still disruptive, but at least there's room for everybody in the same way that's not true for most of our inland lakes. And being out on the lake doesn't protect the users. We talk about shore impact and some mitigation as it gets shallow, or the erosion, but out there on the lake, you are unprotected. That's an unmitigated 5-foot, 6-foot wave that comes at you, and so the swimmers, the paddleboarders, and the kayakers, and the sailors really have to deal. And they don't get to choose when that wake boat comes out. So even if it's 5 minutes or 15 minutes a day, all you have to do is be out in the middle, and you're done. So I appreciate I recommend the 1,000-foot rule, if not a ban.
Followed by Andrea Morgante. Okay, next up we have Corey Scritchfield, followed by Andrea Morgante. You're okay, so is Corey not here? Okay. All right, we do have just about 5 comments left. So I wanted to ask if after this is done, if you could help by folding up your chair if you're able, because we need to fold all the chairs and return them to their places right over here after the meeting. Okay, so Andrea. What?
Just kidding.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Andrea Morganti. I live in Heinsberg. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to provide my comments at this public hearing. Although I don't live on a lake or pond, I'm fortunate to be able to canoe on several nearby ponds and lakes, and when time permits, travel to larger lakes to enjoy the diversity of wildlife, beauty of the mostly clean blue waters that, together with our green mountains, are the true treasures of Vermont. I, like many of the thousands of Vermonters who canoe, kayak, swim, fish, or sail, depend on the state to uphold their responsibility as trustees of these waters. The public trust doctrine demands that the state ensure that the public interest remains paramount, and while it does not preclude private uses, it doesn't need to support individual interests. Thousands of Vermonters will suffer both the environmental consequences and of the unsafe boating conditions caused by even small increases in these powerful and expensive wake boats. It is clear that it is a daunting task to create regulations that will ensure our lakes and ponds are not further degraded. Regulations are only effective if they can be enforced. The proposed regulations do not seem to include any measures that will ensure that they can be enforced. If wake boats are to be allowed through the regulatory process, it seems that the state must make enforcement a priority. With 32 of the lakes that would be allowed with the 500-foot rule, it seems more practical to limit the number of lakes to the 15 that would allow if the 1,000-foot distance was in place. fewer lakes will make it easier for enforcement to happen by the state. It is imperative that Vermont use of public water rules be updated to incorporate environmental considerations using existing scientific evidence.
2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next up, we have Ed Wells, followed by Catherine Simonson.
My name is Ed Wells. My family and I live here in Richmond and are fortunate to have a camp on Salem Lake in Derby for many years. While I support DEC's proposed water rule regulating wake boats, I do not think it's far enough. I strongly support the proposed 1,000-foot operating distance recommendation. I have observed and experienced 2 wake boats on Salem Lake over the past 4 to 5 years. The effects of these 2 boats on the lake's surface, shoreline, and ambience is far greater than anything else on the lake. For safety reasons, my family avoids using paddle craft when wake boats are present. And as very large waves linger well after the boats and their sounds have left the area. As the public boat access greeter coordinator for our lake, I've learned of difficult times for other lake users. Just last weekend, one of our greeters described witnessing a stand-up paddleboard user getting knocked off their board by a wakeboat wave. Evidently, the wakeboat operator was oblivious to the event. I remember talking to a fisherman. His name was Ray. Ray and his 14-foot flat-bottom boat are regulars at the lake. Ray is a man of few words, but I can tell you the words he used to describe wake boats were not kind. Salem, like many other lakes and ponds, requires navigating well away from shore to avoid weed beds. Under these circumstances, 500 feet simply does not always provide enough protection from large wakes. Thanks very much for this opportunity.
All right, next up, we've got Catherine Simonson, followed by Michael Riva.
Good evening. I guess we moved into evening now. I'm Catherine Simonson, and my husband and I were fortunate to have lakeshore property on Lake Parker in West Glover. Owning lakefront property was a dream that we were only able to realize 5 years ago. So I don't have the 75-year or 100-year cred that some others do. But with the 5 years, we treasure the beauty, the tranquility, as well as all the recreational opportunities the small lake affords our family, which brings me to today's public hearing on the draft rule for wakeboats. I appreciate the proposed draft regulation for wakeboards that reflects the consideration of the extensive public comments that have occurred already. And I feel like that really was the response to the concerns about threats to the environment, public safety, and recreation. However, I continue to advocate for the regulation to be strengthened. I think that it should require a 1,000-foot distance from shore, as has been spoken earlier. Based on the research, it's clear there's risk to shoreline erosion without the 1,000-foot distance from shore. I also feel like the greater distance from shore would reduce the potential harm to aquatic life, including the loons. I also remain very concerned about the wakeboat's ability to disturb lake bottom sediments, causing the release of phosphorus and other nutrients, risking algae blooms and reduced clarity. Finally, for me, when I really thought about testifying today, the impact of the July flooding, which now we can say last month's flooding, although it seems so present, had on our little lake and so many other lakes across the state was a brutal reminder of the fragility of our ecosystem with climate change. We desperately need to protect our lakes for future generations so they can enjoy everything our lakes in Vermont have to offer. And we need strong regulation that anticipates the future
and the future that not only that wakeboats may become even more powerful, has been spoken, but also that our lakes are going to be more fragile with climate change. So
2 minutes.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Michael Riva, followed by David Blanchard.
Thank you for your consideration, DEC, on this issue. My name is Michael Riva. I've been a resident here in Vermont for 16 years, and 3 years ago we purchased a camp on Lake Dunmore. However, my lake life started when I was about 2 days old. I grew up on a lake in Connecticut, and the lake was my backyard. I grew up appreciating every aspect of what a lake is, what it provides, and how a lake is appreciated and enjoyed by so many different people in so many different ways. My brother and I would swim, fish, ice fish, skate, and just sit and enjoy the views and the amazing wildlife. And yes, we water skied and jet skied a lot. From the minute my father taught me how to drive a boat and tow a water skier, safety and awareness were the first things he ingrained in me. After all, if you're towing a person behind the boat, the risk factor goes up exponentially, no matter what you're towing. Sometimes I wish those who throw a kid on a tube and whip around the lake uncontrollably would appreciate that a bit more. Those people that I know who have ski and wake boats are some of the most responsible, aware, and skilled boaters on the lake. We drive in predictable straight lines as long as someone doesn't cut us off. We're 100% aware of our surroundings to the point of being paranoid about it. Vermont has led the way in many environmental issues when it comes to recycling, plastic bags, composting, and outdoor activities. All these are based on sound, reasonable arguments and equitable decisions. We can never regulate every specific situation or incident that may arise on the lake or any time we share space. But we can create sound, equitable regulations that make it possible for all of us to enjoy doing what we love. The current DEC proposal calling for a 500-foot shore buffer is reasonable and equitable for those who live and play on the lake. Thank you.
And the last name I have on my sign-up sheet is David Blanchard.
All right. Thanks so much for taking my comments. I'd like to speak on behalf of the Waterbury Reservoir and request that the access by wakeboats be restricted on that body of water. I have a number of reasons for making this request. One, there are many folks fishing from boats who would be adversely affected by such a large disturbance both to the surface of the water and to the sediments on the bottom. For the great number of individuals who daily take advantage of the beauty and serenity of the reservoir, who are on the water under their own power, canoeists, kayakers, paddle boarders, long-distance swimmers, and rowers, I can't imagine not being swamped or endangered by the wake created by the wakeboat. I'm out 2 or 3 times a week training to row my single scull. It's 26 feet long and 10 inches wide at the hull. I have enough trouble staying afloat when hit by the wake by myself, and then caused by speeding motorboats and water skiers when passing at the 200-foot limit required to protect human-powered craft. The disturbance, number 3, the disturbance from the noise and extreme churning of water would affect campers at the wilderness sites who come out to enjoy the beauty and the quiet along with many loons who live and feed on the reservoir. I regularly see groups of 4 or 5 who are undisturbed by my silent single scull rowing by as they forage. Number 4, the safety of the long-distance swimmers who come out to train. I often see them in groups of 2 or 3 swimming from the bay, the day-use area along the dam, or trailing their orange buoys to gain visibility. And to conclude, just one wake boat could endanger and disturb many canoeists, kayakers, paddleboarders, rowers, swimmers, and wildlife. Please adopt the 1,000-foot limit and restrict wake boats to larger and more appropriate bodies of water. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. We got to the end. We had about 45 comments. We reconvene virtually Thursday, 5 p.m. for the second public hearing on this subject. We have somewhere around 40 people signed up for that. we'll continue to accept written comments, as mentioned, until the 10th. Then we'll go from there. I will say that the most effective way to get your voice heard is to comment, and if you can avoid sending emails and letters to our leadership, who are really busy with flood response, and use this process to make your voice heard, that's preferred. Because that way it'll enter enter a review of comments, it'll be part of our responsiveness summary, and it'll be synthesized, and then we'll present our recommendation to leadership, and that's the best way for them to digest the information and make their final decision on how we're going to proceed with this rule before going to LCAR. So thank you very much. I think the Stone Corral is still open. That's where I'm headed. And we appreciate your comments. I think I'll take this question, sir.
Can you tell us how we can access the meeting on the third?
Yeah, so it's more or less. So Vermont, DC, Lakes and Ponds rulemaking. Again, Vermont, DC, Lakes and Ponds rulemaking. If you Google that, you'll get straight to the page. There's a table, and there's information about the meeting on Thursday, August 3rd, including the link. It's not Zoom. We use a platform called Microsoft Teams, but it's similar. And you can click that link and join the meeting at 5 p.m. And if you still want it, there's still room for anyone that hasn't commented. There's still room for another 15 to 20 people to sign up to comment. So if you want to sign up to comment, go home and sign up, and we'd love to hear from you.
It will be available afterwards.
What?
The meeting, that's a protected meeting.
After tonight, or?
No, Thursday's meeting.
Oh, will a recording be made available? We'll definitely record it. I will probably make that available somewhere. I'll consult with the administrative people to make sure that's something we can do, but yes.
Thank you very much.